I can only imagine what that first argument looked like in the Garden of Eden. And I thought that was a pretty good little, I mean, in so many ways, I think sometimes that's the way we argue too. But you remember last week when we began this sermon as a part of our series on the marriage, one of the things we talked about is communication and conflict. One of the things we have to understand is when you put two imperfect people into a communication with each other, somewhere down the line, a conflict is going to come up. And so I have entitled this message, part 2, and Lord knows I'll do my best to go through it. But somebody pointed out, Tanner had to go through a lot of slides last week to finally get to the song. So I can't promise I'm going to finish this message today. If I don't finish it today, we'll finish it next week. Because the reason being is because I'm still in the second main point. There are 3 main points. I'm still in the second main point, and I only got to point 3 or sub-point 3 of the second main point, and there's still about 5 more. And then you go into the main point, and guess what? There's like 5 or 6 more sub-points. So I don't know if I will be able to finish all this message today. But we're going to be talking about today, let's get ready to rumble. Because when it comes to the marriage conflict, or when it comes to the arena of marriage, chances are conflict is going to come. And one of the things we talked about in the last message, if you have not had a chance, it is up on our YouTube channel. You can watch last week's message to kind of tie it into this week's message, because last week we talked about what are the obstacles to good communication. And there are several obstacles that we have that influence or filters, if you will. And in the arena of communication, if you remember last week, there are 6 different messages that can be received or relayed in the arena of in communication. For example, the very first one that we talked about is that the first message is what you want to say. But the second one is you know what you want to say, but you don't say it the way you want to say it. It comes out of your mouth a whole lot different than the way you think it. And then, of course, you know, there's those 6 different ones. But I want to take a review, if you will, because with the second main point, of course, we talked about fight rules. And, of course, in reality, we call it intense fellowship rules. They're intense fellowship rules. Here are the rules to remember. Number 1, do not be in the habit of making yourself heard. It's not about being heard, and it's also not about being right. The goal of communication and conflict is mutual understanding. What does the Proverbs 18:2 says? That a fool is the one that wants to make himself heard. A wise is one who seeks understanding. So the first goal of communication is, of course, the first goal of communication is coming to a mutual understanding. Number 2, don't play loud. Watch your tone. It's not necessarily about what you say, it's also how you say it. You know, sometimes you have these people, they're either, when you get into a conflict, because here's what happens. We talked about this last week. When you have a communication and one person begins to escalate their voice and the other person begins to escalate their voice, what happens to the communication? It comes into a full-blown, knocked out, dragged out, intense fellowship. Why? By the end of the communication, both of them are yelling at each other. Watch how you say it. It's not necessarily also about what you say, about how you say it. Number 3, don't play dirty. Last week we talked about 4 different, actually no we didn't, we talked about 5. We talked about 5 different dirty tactics that people use in the area of communication. And now that brings us to what we are today. Now, here we are. Do not think that if there is no fighting, everything is okay. Now that may come as a surprise to you. To think that because there is no fighting, everything is okay. That's not true. Conflict always brings about opportunities for growth. And I use this verse here in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 because Paul is writing to this church in Corinth, and one of the things that he was writing about was he was saying, you need to deal with this problem that exists within your church. And the problem that they needed to deal with was sexual immorality. But what was happening here is they were ignoring that. And when they were ignoring sexual immorality, in other words, they were trying to prevent conflict from taking place. But by preventing conflict from taking place, what were they allowing within the church? Sexual immorality. Something that went against the very nature of God. The point that we have to realize is when there is no conflict, this is what is happening. Okay? The problems that exist are being ignored. And the problems that exist that are being ignored, what happens to the person that sees the problem but the other is ignoring? The other person becomes resentful. The other person becomes bitter. And so what's happening here is that when you are ignoring the problem that exists and refraining from conflict, here's what's happening. The problem is affecting someone. It may not be affecting you, but it may be affecting the person that you are in a relationship with. Whether it's a marriage relationship, a church relationship, a business relationship, or any kind of relationship. And by the way, when we're looking at these biblical principles, we are looking at biblical principles not just for communication for the marriage, but we're also looking at biblical principles of communication in all relationships. Because if you think about this right here, Paul is talking about the church. He said, you are ignoring a problem, and because you are ignoring a problem, you may be preventing a conflict with each other, but you are causing a conflict between God and you. The truth of the matter is, if a problem exists in any relationship, that problem needs to be addressed, because if that problem does not address, then there is no progress forward in that relationship. And when you bring the problem up to someone, how would that person normally respond? That's not my problem. That's yours. And then when they get into that accusatory tone, what happens to the other person that brings the problem to them? All of a sudden, they start getting defensive. And then what happened to the communication? Conflict. So the first thing we have to realize is that do not think that if there is no fighting, everything is okay. If there is no fighting, something somewhere is being ignored. Something somewhere, somebody somewhere in that relationship has some bitterness within them, resentfulness within them. Do not think the conflict is over when you say, I'm sorry. Just because someone says, I'm sorry, does not mean it's over. Because there's still one important element that's necessary that goes beyond the simply saying, I'm sorry. And this is what it is: forgiveness. Someone saying, I'm sorry, does not mean that person has been forgiven. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, y'all, it still blows my mind how many people come up to me after the end of last week's service and said, man, my spouse needed that message. And I had somebody get mad at me because I said, but did you? Because who is the biggest problem in every relationship? We are. Paul David Tripp says, I am my biggest marital problem. So we find here, and if one has a complaint against another, what do we do? If we have a complaint against someone, what do? We forgive. Why? Look what, keep reading. As the Lord did what? Has forgiven who? You. You want a reason why you need to forgive those that you have a complaint against? I'll give you one, and it's all you need. It's because God himself forgave you. So you must also do what? Forgive. Saying I'm sorry does not mean the conflict is over. The only way you will ever be able to move past the conflict in your relationship is forgiveness. It's the only way. All right, number 6, here we go. Everybody write this down. Do not blame your spouse for the conflicts in your marriage. We saw that in the first argument, didn't we? They were trying to blame each other, weren't they? Here's the reason. If you remember, one of the biggest obstacles last week that I shared with you in the arena of communication, one of the biggest obstacles that always leads to conflict is selfishness. We only see things our way. We only want to do things our way. Rather than coming to a mutual understanding, we come to a conflict because rather than coming to a mutual understanding, we only want to do things our way and see things our way, and we will not bend until the person that we are in a communication / conflict with agrees with us or finally submits to our way. That's not how it works. Let me tell you what the problem with communication is. The problem with conflict is not the person you are in a conflict with, it's because of you. In other words, you need an attitude check. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? In other words, what you desire, what you want, what you so desperately want to have, to accomplish, to grasp. It's because of that. It's your own selfish desires. Is it not that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. In other words, this is hyperbole that he's talking about. It is an hyperbole. He's making it more than it really is. But he's trying to prove a point. Because what did Jesus say? Murder is not just trying to kill somebody, it's also hating your who? Brother. That's in 1 John. Anyone that hates his brother has committed murder in his heart. You covet. In other words, you desire, you want, you covet. And you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not, what? Ask. Honey, can I have a Krispy Kreme donut? And she says yes. But when I don't get my Krispy Kreme donut, y'all, the wrath of God comes down upon the household. But the truth of the matter is, here's the reason why people fight. People fight is because they're not trying to seek mutual understanding. People fight is because they only see things one way, and that's their way. My way or the highway. Number 7. Keep the past where it belongs. There's a reason why they call it the past. It's done. You cannot change what happens in the past. But there is one thing you can change, and it's the only thing you can change when it comes to the past. is your attitude towards it. That is the only thing you can change. And by the way, do we believe that God forgives us of our past? Everybody, amen? We believe God forgives us of our past. Then why haven't you? When you are in a communication with someone and things, and you're trying, because here's what happens. If we're not careful and we don't get a control of our tongue, and we talked about this in James 3, if you don't get a control of your tongue, you're going to say things that you're going to regret. You're going to say things that's going to hurt the relationship that you were in. You're going to say things when your spouse will no longer trust you because of something you said to that person by bringing up their past. I've said this to so many people that I talk to in our community. It's not about where you come from. It's about who you are and where you're going. What you come from is not who you are anymore. You're not the same person you were 5 years ago. Guess what? Neither is the person that you're talking to. Neither is your spouse. And the worst thing that we can ever do in the arena of communication is to bring up that person's past. Do you remember when you did? Do you remember? Do you remember? Guess what? You have taken on the role that the devil wants you to have, because he is nothing more than an accuser of the brethren. He wants you to never forget your past. He wants you to become so, feel like you're so unworthy because of your past that God has not forgiven you, that when the person you are in a communication with begins to try to accuse you of the things about your past, that person, that spouse, that individual has taken on the role of the devil by serving as an accuser of the brethren. And this is what I say to the devil. When the devil wants to remind you of your past, you remind him of his future, and you say, I have been forgiven by the blood of Jesus. The problem is not the person's past. The problem is your attitude to that person's past. I love the New Living Translation in Isaiah 43:18. It says, forget what happened long ago. Forget it. Forget it. It's done. Don't think about the past. Don't think about the past. Number 8. Do not let others get involved. Do not let others get involved. If there is a conflict that exists, it is between you two and no one else. And it should be no one else's business. It blows my mind how when conflicts arise, people work to try to get others to choose sides. That is not the spirit of Christ. A communication between a husband and a wife needs to be between the husband and the wife. A conflict needs to be between a husband and a wife, not everybody else. I've been doing a premarital counseling. I started premarital counseling with a couple that's getting ready to get married in the spring. And this is one of the things I told them, and I said it here, I said it in the very first sermon. When a man shall leave his father and mother, they shall be one flesh. You are leaving your father and mother, and you are starting your own family. Your marriage needs to be between you two. Keep your family out of it. Because here's what's going to happen. If the wife brings her family into it, the husband is going to feel extremely outnumbered. And the only natural response to being outnumbered by a human being is what? To lash out. That's the natural response. And vice versa. Keep people out of it. Only. And by the way, there is a biblical principle to understand when it comes to trying to involve other people. I think it's extremely important that we do this, that we understand what this is. These are the words of Jesus, by the way. These are the words of Jesus himself. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him. What's the next word? Alone. Does that mean have other people with me? No. Who's it involved? Just you and him. Absolutely. He's catching on. Now, I understand it says brother, it doesn't say spouse, but there's a principle here. Everybody understand? This is not just a relationship with, say, me and Tanner or me and Slim. This is any relationship, by the way. It can be any relationship. I mean, you know, I look at Teresa. She's my sister in Christ. It's my relationship with her. We need, if we have a problem with someone, we need to approach that person with the problem, address the problem with that person, rather than going over here and say, Tanner, you ought to see what Slim just did to me. Because here's what I am doing. I am now participating in the arena, not of communication, but in the, exactly, gossip. Do y'all understand what the word gossip literally means? The word gossip literally means tattletale in our understanding. Scandalmonger. The one who loves to spread scandal. But guess what? If I have a problem with Slim, I need to take it to Slim first and not spread it around everyone else, because then I have done nothing but participate in the sin, and by the way, gossip is sin. And it's the same way in the marriage relationship. A marriage relationship, if there is a problem between a husband and wife, they need to address that problem first. If they cannot, you don't go to your family. I promise you, because it'll make it worse. But if that person does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. So what you do? I've got a problem with Slim. Slim won't listen to me. So what do? What's my next step? I go find 2 or 3 spiritually wise people. So I'm going to go to Chuck, I'll go to Frank, and I'll go to another elder or someone that I can trust. Someone that I know that is neutral, and I'll say, here's the problem. And then us 3 will begin. And by the way, in the realm of marriage conflict, we call that seeking counseling. When you are stuck in your conflict, then I say, this is what I say, either A, find someone, a counselor, that will be on neutral grounds with you too. Because here's what happens. If you find someone who's neutral, one, they won't be picking those sides. And here's number 2. Go to your pastor. We've been trained. We've been taught about how to deal with conflict in marriage. I have been through many different seminars that deals with marriage and marital conflicts. And I have vast number of resources that I have used to help me to better myself to counsel marriage couples in counseling. And by the way, don't go to someone else until you are stuck. And if even that doesn't work, if he refuses to listen to them, what do? Tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. And by the way, he's speaking to Jews. Jews do not like Gentiles and tax collectors. The point of the matter is, Jesus has given us some right steps. Do not, unless it's absolutely necessary, do not involve anyone else in the conflict in the relationship. Only until you are stuck. Because the natural thing for us to do is that when we enter into a conflict, we want to talk. Let me tell you something. You cannot control when other people want to spread their conflict to you, their gossip. But here's what you can control. You can control whether you listen to it. Do not go to bed mad. Do not, we had a couple of weeks ago, we had our Success Coffee Fellowship, and one of the things I asked those that were in the Success Coffee Fellowship, I think the one that was there, the youngest they've been married, or the shortest they've been married, I think was 38 years, and then there was Frank. Frank Farrell been married 60. And then Dee and Rogers right there behind, they were at 59. And then Ed and Ruth, I think they were 57, weren't they? I think they were like 57 years old. And I asked them, it was the weekend before our marriage retreat in Westford. And I asked them, I said, if you had to give one advice, I said, what would it be? And the number one advice was this: don't go to bed mad. And do you know what? It's biblical. Be angry and do not sin. By the way, I think it was Frank. You shared with me an article about it's okay to be mad. A couple of weeks ago from one of your AARP magazines that you read. You shared with me and you wanted my input about is it okay to be mad. Notice what he says. Be angry and do not sin. There is a way to be angry and not sin. You see that? But what else is to say? Do not let the sun go down on your... Don't go to bed mad. Because if you go to bed mad, I learned this from experience. If you go to bed mad, it's going to be a cold night in bed. There is, by the way, there is a right way to be angry. But this is what we have to be angry about. We have to be angry about the right thing. And the right thing that we can be angry about is sin. God hated sin. God disliked sin. We talked about that this morning in our Sunday school classroom. I mean, Genesis 6, the Bible says that God regretted making the world. That's how evil he had become. God regretted because he hated sin. He hated what it did to his beautiful creation. He hated what it did to his relationship with the Creator. And it upset him. It angered him. But here's the problem we have when it comes to anger. Let's be honest. Most of our anger is directed at trivial, silly things. Right? But the point of the matter is, and here's the thing, when it comes to being angry and not sin, it means, A, don't bring up your past. It means, B, don't be knocking down that other person, saying things you shouldn't be saying in the first place. In other words, be careful. Be careful with the tongue. Because we allow our anger, our emotions to control the tongue. And when it controls the tongues in our relationship, things come out, that we are going to regret so much later. Biblical principles for great communication. I got about 20 minutes till 12, so I'm going to try to go through this. Biblical principles for great communication. Number one, speak plain words. Make it simple. Have you ever been in a communication with someone? We men like it simple. And by the way, we might think we have all these superpowers in the world, but ladies, we cannot read your mind. Amen, man? Tell us what it is. I'm mad at you. What for? What did I do? Well, if you don't know, I won't tell you. And then she looks at you. And you're like, are you trying to transport what I did to you into my mind? It don't work. My mind is too simple. We like simple things. It only thinks about three things: Krispy Kreme, sleep, and Krispy Kreme. Amen? Be consistent about what you're trying to say. And by the way, I know I'm talking about, but men, we've got to do the same thing. We've got to be consistent. We've got to be plain about what we're trying to say here. And here's the biblical. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Be simple about it. If there is a problem that needs to be addressed in your relationship, tell us what it is and be simple about it. You know, my wife shared something on Facebook the other night, and I'm like, oh, no, she didn't. A friend shared it. I'm sorry. But my wife, I love her. She admitted she's guilty. It had two pictures side by side. One picture was point A, point B, and it was about storytelling. And there was a box, point A, and one simple line to point B. There's the other box. Okay? And then there's her friend, our friend from back in Bellevue shared this. My wife admitted she's guilty. Point A, point B, and there's 1,000 boxes in between. And somehow or another, they go through all the boxes before they get to point B, and all of a sudden we're like, what was your point? The truth of the matter is, and we talked about this last week, there is a difference between men and women, especially in the way they communicate. And a lot of times when you have these differences in the way they communicate, it causes conflict. Just tell me what it is. Speak plain words. And by the way, hey, I can do everything except one thing, beautiful wife of mine. I can't read your mind. I can't do everything. I know. I'm just saying. But first thing we need to realize is speak plain words. Number two, speak profitable words. You know what usually happens in an area of conflict? People start putting down each other. You John Deere loving, Kansas Jayhawk cheering, you need Jesus person. In the area of communication, we need to speak profitable words. And this is what I mean, profitable words. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for what? Building up. This is what I mean by speaking profitable words. Rather than putting the other person down, encourage them. Sweet, loving wife of mine. Sassy little redhead from Canada. That's not normally what happens. But the truth of the matter is, and this is not just in the marriage relationship, this is any relationship. We got to stop putting each other down and start building each other up. And so he says here, for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. So when you're in the area of communication, don't put the other person down. That's not helping. In fact, when you start putting the other person down, chances are that other person is going to turn around and put you down, and the communication move from communication to what? Conflict. So here's the next one. Speak profitable words. Speak pure words. Let no corrupting talk. This is what I mean. Keep it clean. Keep it clean. But only such as good for building up as fits the occasion, and it may give grace to those who hear. Here's another verse to go with that. From the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not be so. Don't be speaking with a forked tongue. Be consistent in how you communicate with that person. All right? Number 4, speak pleasant words. All right? Pleasant words are as an honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones. You really want to come to a mutual understanding? Speak pleasantly. Brent, I know that you are a Jayhawks fan. I still love you, man. I mean, you know, despite all of your failures and flaws, you're still my brother in Christ. And you have a lot of failures and flaws, by the way. But the truth of the matter is, as long as I'm not putting you down, we're good. Be careful how you speak. Speak in a way that's positive. Speak, and this is how it is, okay? Speak with kindness. I mean, one of the fruit, or one of the characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Speak with kindness. If you want to go with mutual communication or mutual understanding in your communication, make sure you speak with kindness, because once you take that kindness out of your communication, what happens? The boxing gloves come off. Speak prepared words. And this is what I mean by speak prepared words. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer. Think about what you say before you say it. When you don't think about what you say before you say it, what normally comes out? Something you wish you never said. So the heart of a righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. So in our arena of communication, if there's one thing we need to be doing, is we need to be thinking about what we're going to say before we even say it. You remember what I shared last week? How many ears do you have? 2. How many mouths do you have? 1. Which one do you tend to use the most? The mouth. And when you use the mouth, that means you're not thinking. If you're using the mouth more than the ears, you're not thinking about what you're saying when you say it. All right. Speak prepared words. The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious. In other words, he thinks about it. He ponders it. I need to make sure that what I'm getting ready to say is not going to escalate the situation. I need to make sure that what I'm going to say is helping us move to the goal of mutual understanding. I need to make sure that what I'm going to get ready to say is not going to be a subtle put down of the person that I'm in a communication with. I need to make sure that what I'm getting ready to say glorifies God and does not increase or escalate the communication into a conflict that I'm in right now. A fool gives full vent to his spirit. In other words, it doesn't even take the time to think about what he says. He just says whatever comes to his mind without even giving a thought to what's been said. Let me ask you a question. Is that an example that Jesus gave to us? When it comes to communicating with other people, who is the greatest example we have to follow? Jesus. You're talking about, we're getting ready to come up to Easter. You're talking about the same person who hung on the cross, and the very first words out of his mouth was what? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. The average person, if they were in Jesus' shoes, this is what they would say. God, bring down lightning and strike them dead. In other words, we allow our emotions to control rather than our mind to filter out what we want to say. Whoa, hey, that was my last point. Hey. I did it. 10 till 12, I did it. Hey! The point of the message this morning, especially last week and this morning, is this. When you are in the area of communication, the goal of that communication is mutual understanding. And if we want to have that mutual understanding, we cannot, if me and Tanner were trying to come to a goal of mutual understanding, it's not going to come by making Tanner hear everything I have to say. It's not going to be trying to show Tanner, you know what, you're wrong, I'm right. That's not. How it's going to happen is that we have the right approach in our communication. In other words, when Tanner and I were trying to reach a mutual understanding, this is what I'm trying to do. First of all, I need to treat you with kindness. I need to speak profitable. I need to encourage you. I need to speak pleasantly. I need to keep it simple. In other words, I need to explain my point of view, and I have to expect the same from you. You explain your point of view. The point of the matter is, conflict is going to happen, but it does not mean it's a bad thing. What makes conflict a bad thing is what you do. Everybody understand? Conflict, if there is no conflict, chances are something is being ignored. A problem that needs to be addressed is being ignored. And if that problem that needs to be addressed is being ignored, no opportunity of growth is going to happen in that marriage. In fact, 9 out of 10 times, the problem that exists that is not being addressed, the problem that exists that is being ignored, is driving a wedge between the two people that need to have a communication about it. The point of this message is this, is to provide to you biblical principles. And I've said this in every message. I'm coming to you with biblical, I'm not coming to you as a renowned expert. I mean, if you want to talk to me about donuts, I can sit down and talk with you hours after hours after hours about donuts. But when it comes to having a successful marriage, the only thing I have is the Word of God. Nothing else. The principles. And so the principles of communication that I shared with you, my encouragement to you as you are continuing this journey as husband and wife, that you apply these principles of communication in your marriage relationship. And by the way, not just in your marriage relationship, but in your relationship with everyone. Why? Why? Why, Pastor? Why with everyone? And the answer is simply this. Because you represent Jesus Christ. And when you represent Jesus Christ, you represent Jesus Christ in all areas of your life. And that includes your speech, your communication. Every head's bowed and every eye's closed, we ask the kids.